The CNN studio lights blaze as Karl Rove sat behind a panel desk, his signature smirk spreading across his face like a politician who had just spotted an opening in his opponent's argument. The 74-year-old Republican strategist adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and straightened his red tie, clearly relishing what he expected to be another easy victory. He had just finished tearing apart the Biden administration's latest policy with the surgical precision that had made him one of the most feared political operatives in Washington. The studio buzzed with the usual pre-segment energy as makeup artists made final touch-ups, camera operators adjusted their angles, and producers whispered last-minute instructions through earpieces. But there was something different in the air tonight, an unspoken attention that suggested this was not going to be just another routine political panel discussion when the moderator announced the next segment, introducing Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett from Texas. Rove's eyes lit up like a predator spotting easy prey. He leaned back in his chair with the confidence of someone who had been dismantling Democratic politicians on television for over 2 decades. This was going to be fun, but what happened in the next 25 minutes would leave political Washington speechless, turning Karl Rove the man they called Bush's brain into a viral meme of humiliation and launching Jasmine Crockett into the national spotlight as the most formidable new voice in Democratic politics, because Crockett did not just come to defend her record or toe the party line. She came armed with stories so powerful, so personal, and so devastating that it would expose everything wrong with the Republican establishment and remind America what authentic leadership truly looks like. This was not going to be another forgettable cable news segment lost in the 24-hour cycle. It was about to become a masterclass in how lived experience can destroy political artifice, how authenticity can outmatch credentials, and how sometimes the most powerful weapon in politics is telling the truth about your own life. The moment Crockett appeared on screen via satellite from her congressional office, Rove leaned forward like a shark sensing blood. Her natural hair was styled perfectly in a way that commanded respect without apology, and she wore a sharp blue blazer that balanced professionalism with authenticity. She looked directly into the camera with the confidence of someone who had been underestimated her entire life and learned to turn that underestimation into a weapon. Behind her, viewers saw a backdrop filled with meaning photos with constituents, framed legislation she had authored, and prominently displayed military honors belonging to her family members. This was not the sterile consultant-designed congressional office, but a personal, intentional space that showed she understood how every detail mattered when representing people who rarely saw themselves in positions of power. Rove, meanwhile, sat in the CNN studio, surrounded by the sleek desk, the perfectly lit backdrop, and the other panelists who nodded along like members of an exclusive club. The visual contrast was striking. Consultant in his comfortable media bubble versus the Congresswoman working from a very office where she served her constituents. Well, Rove muttered just loud enough for the microphones to catch. His Alabama drawl carrying decades of condescension. Here comes another squad member to tell us how everything is racist. The words drip with the casual dismissiveness that had become his trademark, suggesting that anyone who challenged Republican orthodoxy was merely playing identity politics rather than offering legitimate policy criticism. The other panelists shifted uncomfortably in their seats, and even for cable news where conflict was currency, this felt unusually hostile. From the start, Jake Tapper's eyebrows rose, slightly a subtle sign that even he, a veteran of thousands of contentious interviews, knew this was going to be different. But Crockett just smiled, and that should have been Rove's first warning sign to understand what was about to unfold. One must know exactly who these two political heavyweights are and why this clash was inevitable. Karl Rove, 74 years old, is the ultimate Republican insider, the architect behind George W. Bush's presidential victories, and for decades, the party's top strategist. With his bald head, wire-rimmed glasses, and Southern drawl, Rove built a reputation as the man who could destroy any Democrat with surgical precision, appearing on Fox News over 500 times, writing for the Wall Street Journal, and commanding speaking fees of $50,000 per appearance. This was a man accustomed to winning every political fight, and for him, the CNN appearance was supposed to be routine maintenance of his public profile. Attack the Democrats with focus group talking points and defend Republican positions with practice ease, positions with practice sound bites, collect a substantial appearance fee, and move on to the next gig. He had done it thousands of times before across every major network. Fresh-faced Democrats, especially black women from the South, were his specialty, and he knew exactly how to dismiss them, how to make them look inexperienced, how to turn their passion into a liability that confirmed every stereotype his audience already believed the formula was simple and effective remind. Everyone of the experience gap questioned their credibility with subtle condescension, throw in some insider knowledge to demonstrate superior expertise, and then pivot to a well-tested Republican talking point that had worked against everyone from Howard Dean to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And there was no reason to think this time would be any different. Rove had spent the morning reviewing Crockett's basic biography first term. Congresswoman, former defense attorney, progressive, voting record standard. Stuff his research team had prepared the usual opposition materials highlighting her most liberal votes and any controversial statements that could be used to paint her as out of touch with mainstream America. What they had not prepared him for was someone who could turn his own weapons against him with surgical precision. But Jasmine Crockett was not just any freshman Democrat. At 43, the former defense attorney from Dallas had already made waves in her short time in Congress, but not in the way most newcomers did. While others focused on committee assignments and learning the unwritten rules of Washington, Crockett immediately began calling out hypocrisy wherever she found it, and she had particular talent for finding it in places others feared to look. She had grown up in Lewis during the crack epidemic, watching her neighborhood factories close and families struggle. She put herself through law school working nights at a legal aid clinic, learning early that the law could be either a tool of oppression or liberation depending on who wielded it. When she opened her own defense practice, she specialized in the cases big firms would not touch, representing people who had been failed by every system they encountered. Her path to Congress did not run through party connections or political dynasties. She won her primary by knocking on doors in neighborhoods politicians only visited during election years, and she beat her Republican opponent by focusing on bread and butter, issues that mattered to working families, kitchen table economics, not boardroom theory and committee hearings. She grilled witnesses with precision of a courtroom prosecutor who had spent years catching people in lies on social media. Her videos breaking down complex legislation into plain language regularly went viral. Because she had a gift for showing how policy affected real lives, she was unafraid to challenge anyone, Democrat or Republican, if she believed they were putting politics over principles. What made her dangerous to establishment figures like Rove was not just her intelligence or her communication skill, but her complete lack of deference to the power structures that ruled Washington. She had not come to Congress to make friends or climb ladders. She had come to fight for the people who sent her there, and she did not care whose feelings got hurt. More importantly, Crockett had something. Rove did not expect a perfect memory for details, and a prosecutor's instinct for finding the weak spot in any argument. The stakes of this clash went far beyond cable news debate. This was about the future of American politics, with the old guard of consultants continued to dominate the conversation, or was a new generation of authentic voices ready to break through. Rove represented everything broken in Washington, the backroom deals, the corporate influence, the assumption that ordinary people were too stupid to understand what was really happening. Crockett represented the possibility of something different, politics rooted in lived experience, honest conversation, and a fight for working families. As the cameras rolled, Jake Tapper introduced the topic, the latest jobs report, and what it meant for American families, and invited Congresswoman Crockett to respond to Mr. Rove's analysis. Rove had just spent 3 minutes explaining why the jobs numbers were fake and how Democrats were cooking the books to hide economic failure. His tone was condescending, his fact selective, and his conclusion predetermined. Everything was terrible. It was all the Democrats' fault. It was classic Karl Rove, confident, dismissive, and designed to make his opponent look foolish for disagreeing with what he framed as obvious truth. But as Crockett began to speak, there was something in her voice that made everyone in the studio sit up straighter, a tone that signaled this was not a politician reciting talking points, but someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment, the perfect platform, to say something that had been building inside her. For years, the camera operators adjusted their shots. Instinctively, the other panelists who had been half listening suddenly gave her their full attention, and even the production assistants in the control room stopped their chatter and turned toward the monitors. Something was about to happen, and everyone could feel it. Mr. Rove, Crockett began, her voice steady, but edged with steel. I find it interesting that you want to talk about fake numbers when your entire career was built on selling fake wars. The studio went dead silent, the kind of silence that falls when everyone realizes they are witnessing history unfold. In real time, you could almost hear the producers scrambling to decide how to handle what was clearly becoming must-see television. This was not polite political disagreement. This was personal, direct, and dangerous. Across newsrooms, editors stopped multitasking and stared at their screens. Social media managers prepared to clip the exchange. Political reporters began drafting tweets, and the other panelists sat frozen, aware they were now only spectators to something far larger than a routine segment. Rove's smirk faltered for an instant before returning full force. "Well, Congresswoman, I think you are a little out of your depth here. We are talking about economics, not relitigating foreign policy decisions. You probably were not even paying attention to when they were made. The condescension dripped from every word like venom from a snake's fangs. And this was a standard Rove playbook, refined over decades of political combat had taught Rove to remind everyone he was an experienced adult in the room while treating his opponent like a naive child who did not understand how the world really worked, and the technique had been devastatingly effective against countless Democrats who made the mistake of trying to match his insider credentials rather than challenge the entire premise of his authority. But as Rove delivered what he believed would be a knockout punch, something unexpected happened, because instead of getting defensive or angry, instead of falling into the trap that had ensnared so many others, Crockett smiled. And it was not the polished political smile cable news audiences were accustomed to seeing, the kind that masked calculation while consultants scrambled to craft a response. This was different. This was a smile of someone who had just watched her opponent make exactly the mistake she had been waiting for, the smile of a prosecutor who had just heard a witness lie about something she could prove with documented evidence, the kind of smile that should have made Karl Rove very nervous. But Rove, cocooned in decades of successful political combat and the comfort of establishment media, missed every warning sign and stayed locked into his rehearsed attack lines, unaware he was walking into a carefully set trap by someone who understood exactly how men like him operated. "Oh, I was paying attention," she said, leaning forward slightly. "I was paying attention when you and your friends lied about weapons of mass destruction. I was paying attention when you sent my neighbors' kids to die in Iraq based on intelligence you knew was false. And I was especially paying attention to how much money your consulting firm made from defense contractors. While those kids came home in flag-draped coffins, the other panelists looked like they wanted to vanish, because this was no longer cable news theater. This was personal, specific, and deeply uncomfortable. Rove's face began to redden. "That is a completely inappropriate characterization of my..." Crockett cut in with the precision of a prosecutor keeping a witness on the ropes. "Because I have done my homework. Mr. Rove, should we talk about your client list? Should we talk about how much money you have made selling access to Republican politicians? Should we talk about why someone who has never held elected office gets to lecture actual elected officials about what their constituents need?" The camera caught Rove's jaw tightening and used to such direct challenge, especially from someone he clearly expected to steamroll. "I think you are confusing me with someone else," he said, his Alabama drawl thickening as his composure cracked. "I have served my country with distinction, and I do not appreciate a first-term congresswoman who does not know the first thing about governing trying to lecture me about public service." But it was a fatal mistake, because what Rove did not know, what he could not have known from the surface-level research his team provided, was that Jasmine Crockett had grown up in a military family. Her father had served 2 tours in Vietnam. Her brother had done 3 deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan, and she had spent her childhood on military bases and her adult life watching her family live with the consequences of wars started by men like Karl Rove. "You want to talk about service?" she said, her voice quieter now, which those who knew her recognized as a dangerous sign. "Let me tell you about service, Mr. Rove." The camera zoomed in as the political mask fell away, and viewers suddenly saw not just a congresswoman debating a pundit, but a daughter, a sister, and a woman who had seen the real cost of political games. "My father served his country in Vietnam," she began her